Om Parthaya Pradibodhidam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gradhidam Puranam Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaidam Radavarshinim Bhagavadim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatva Manusantadhami Bhagavad Gite Bhavadveshinim Yam Brahma Varunendra Rudramarudhastunnanti Divyaistavaihi Vedai Sangapadakramopanisadaihi Gayanti Yam Samagaha Dhyanavasthita Tadgatena Manasa Pashyandi Yam Yogino Yasyandam Navidusura Suragana Devaya Tasmai Namaha. We were discussing a very interesting subject related to our everyday spiritual life. In this 6th chapter, Dhyana Yoga, in the 33rd sloka verse, Arjuna is asking the question. Arjuna Uvacha, Yoyam yogastoya prokta samena madhusudana edasyaham na pashyami chanjalatva sthidim sthiram. The next one, Chanjalam hi mana Krishna pramadhi belavadridham tasyaham nigraham manne vayoriva sudushkaram. We already discussed this. Arjuna is asking this question. Spiritual life is certainly our ideal, and for that we have to restrain our thoughts, our activities, our mind, in fact, we have to feed our mind with good thoughts, good ideas. But there is a problem. Mind doesn't listen to us. Mind doesn't listen to you. Mind rather would like you to listen to its dictates. That's the problem. And mind is always wavering, chanchalam. That is the word used here. Chanchalam hi mana Krishna pramadhi belavadridham. The mind is always restless, turbulent, strong, unyielding, and it is full of vikshepa. Vikshepa means wavering, fleeting from one idea to another idea, not being able to concentrate on one single great idea for long, and to practice it in our life. And this constant movement of thoughts and ideas in mind actually make our mind restless. That's what Patanjali calls Vikshipta-manah, according to Vyasa's commentary. That is the character of normal human beings, especially spiritual seekers. When we are in the company of holy persons, when we are reading a great holy book, when we attend a prayer session, or when we discuss some spiritual ideas, we feel a great elation, a great joy, a great inner feeling of fulfillment. We feel a great inner joy. So we sometimes imagine, well, this is wonderful. I must continue this. I should not leave this out. So there is a sincere, earnest desire to focus the mind on spiritual ideas, so that we will be able to enjoy this inner freedom, inner restfulness. But after some time that is gone, mind doesn't take any interest in spiritual ideas. Like, as I mentioned, the pendulum of a clock that moves from one extreme to the other extreme. There is a problem not only for spiritual seekers, but ordinary human beings. But people who don't take interest in spiritual life, they are able to focus on many other activities, sports, games, hobbies, and so on. Or maybe there are many outlets, many sources in modern times, many ways of distracting the mind towards something so that mind will not bother us, mind will not trouble us, mind will not express its anxiety, so we don't feel the restless nature of the mind. People get obsessed with certain activities. That's only an attempt to run away from a disturbing, turbulent mind. Every such distraction is a flight, is running away from one's own mind, because we don't dare to confront the mind head on. So we want to escape from the restlessness, from the anxieties and worries. So we take interest in so many other activities. But in spiritual life, we are actually coming face to face with our own mind. We are not running away from our mind. We are rather trying to direct our mind to something creative, something constructive, something positive. When we try to do that, mind revolts. So that's why Krishna admits this in the 35th verse, Asamsayam Mahabahu Mano Durnigraham Chalam. Lord Krishna tells Arjuna, you are right, mind is naturally restless and difficult to control. It's very difficult to control. So when Arjuna complained to Lord Krishna, Chanchalam hi mana Krishna, Pramadhivalavadridam, or teacher, my mind is restless, turbulent. It's not able to focus on anything. Lord Krishna admits, yes, it is true. But there's a method, there's a way to reduce the restless nature of mind. And eventually, you'll find your mind will listen to you when you try to do something that is eventually for your good. We feel restlessness and anxiety and conflict, this inner conflict, when we find that our mind is not listening to us, is not cooperating with us, when we try to do something good, meditation or any spiritual practices, something that's eventually good for us, but there's no entertainment. Because every entertainment is one way of running away from our mind. Here we are facing the mind straight, face to face, and trying to direct our mind to something positive, something constructive, something creative, something that will eventually lead to this feeling of inner tranquility and peace and equanimity. At that time, mind begins to evolve. So Lord Krishna says, there's a way, there's a method by which slowly, in a friendly way, you can direct the mind towards something creative, something positive. Abhyasa and Vairagya. So Abhyasena tu Kaundeya Vairagyena cha Grihyate. You'll be able to control this mind, which is naturally restless, through constant practice, through constant effort, and renunciation. So renunciation here means developing a strong aversion towards things that creates distractions in the mind, developing an aversion, a natural dislike, an intense dislike for things that create doubt, skepticism, and conflicts in our mind. So that we'll be doing less and less of those things that create distraction, and doing more and more those things that be helpful to create peace in mind. For that we must read books. We must fill our mind with ideas which are conducive to spiritual life. If we fill our mind with ideas which are adverse to spiritual life, which are not in tune with spirituality, spiritual ideas, then mind will revolt when you direct it to spirituality, to spiritual values. Slowly you should befriend our mind. It is possible to turn our mind into a friend. Remember, mind doesn't take a neutral position. If you don't try to befriend your mind, then you will be indirectly inviting antagonism from your own mind. Mind doesn't take a neutral position. So slowly we must try to feed our mind with constant effort. And in fact, there are many wonderful ideas. This is something that we had to take up ourselves, this challenge. So Shankaracharya says in a very strong language, using a metaphor, he says, Mastaganyasta bharade dukkham anye nivaride kshudadika gram dukkham tu vina swena na kenachit. Suppose you have a heavy box or luggage on your head, too heavy for you to bear. Somebody comes and offers help. Well, I shall relieve you of this weight for some time. And you're relieved of this burden. It is at the physical level. So any person, any friend, any stranger can come and take the heavy bag or box or whatever is on your head, can relieve you of this heavy burden. And you will feel an incredible relief at that time. But kshudadikrita dukkham, suppose you are hungry, you are thirsty, you have a headache, some of these experiences, then another person cannot take away your hunger. You have to eat food to get freedom from your hunger. You have to drink water to quench your thirst. And you have to take medicine if you are sick. Somebody else taking medicine won't be of any help to you. So this is something that we had to undertake ourselves. Vastu Swarupam Spudabodha Chakshusha Swenaiva Vedyam Nadu Pandidena Chandra Swarupam Nija Chakshusaiva Jadavyam Anne Kim Avagamyadi. So this is also another interesting verse. Spiritual growth, spiritual reality, spiritual ideas should be realized ourselves by our own effort. It cannot be done through somebody's help. Somebody can help you, but our own effort is crucial in facing the problems and eventually reaching the goal. So that is a very interesting discussion that is beginning in these coming verses. What happens to a person who feels skeptical, disappointed? He's trying again and again to meditate. He's trying again and again to start a spiritual life. Let us say a person listening to lectures, reading a book, may take a decision where tomorrow onwards I shall practice certain disciplines in life. It could be in the case of drug addiction, alcoholism, and many such problems, areas of problems also, you can find this mechanism works. You take a decision and you tell yourself you start a new life tomorrow, but then when the time comes, we are not able to do that because our accumulated habits, tendencies and impressions won't permit us. We want to do, but our mind suddenly stands in the way, creating stumbling blocks. So what should we do? We should continue our effort, Sri Ramakrishna in the Gospel says this about this Atma Samyoga, self-restraint. Can a man learn to feel a man's pulse on one day? He must go about without a physician for many days. Can anyone or everyone pick out a yarn of particular count? If you are in the trade, you can distinguish in a moment. So it is taken from the tradition of Ayurveda, Indian school of medicine, where the physicians directly teach their students. So students have to live with the physicians in ancient times. Will have to work with the physician. When a physician goes about treating a patient, or when he examines a patient to check the pulse, they have their own unique method of checking the pulse. The ancient Indian Ayurvedic physicians. So they will take their students or disciples, and the students also will learn from practical teaching. That's why Sri Ramakrishna says, can a man learn to feel a man's pulse in one day? He must go about with a physician for many days. The physician, the doctor, the Ayurvedic doctors in ancient times, they used to take their students. And it takes a long time for the students to become experts, because there is no modern gadgets available. It's by touching with your finger, with your hand, you'll be able to correctly predict the pulse. But that skill takes a long time to master and to be an expert in, to develop expertise in that area. So you have to practice again and again. This is very important. Again, Sri Ramakrishna says in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, he says, through the discipline of constant practice, one is able to give up attachment to women and goal. That's what Gita says. By practice, one gets uncommon power of mind. So, the uncommon power of mind, when we give up our desire for material pleasures and enjoyments, that gives us a tremendous sense of self-control. When we feel our mind is perfectly within our control, which means our mind is friendly. When our mind is becoming our friend, slowly we start feeling this inner joy, comfort, tranquility and peace. When our mind turns to be our antagonist, then slowly we feel conflict. So if you give your mind bad food, it becomes your enemy. It creates anxiety, it creates conflicts, it becomes our enemy. The same mind becomes a friend when you give it good, nutritious, spiritual food. What is spiritual food? Any good association. It need not necessarily be directly through persons. Even if you go to the library in the university, take a good book, read, and you are actually living in the company of distinguished sages and saints. If you read the Bhagavad Gita, suddenly you feel you are in the company of the great spiritual teachers of ancient India. If you read the centuries of Avila's autobiography, you feel you are in the company of a great mystic. You are also joining in the spiritual struggle, and you feel that inner inestimable joy. So mind suddenly becomes your friend. Mind becomes less antagonistic. So Lord Krishna continues, Asamyadatmana yogo dushprapa iti me mati vasyatmana tu yatada shakye vatmabhuva upayataka. Yoga is very, very hard to obtain by one who is asamyadatmana, means by somebody whose mind is not within his control. A person who has no self-restraint. Because suddenly you take a great interest in spiritual life, but then after some time the mind goes just the opposite extreme. This is the main problem. You find this happening in the case of people who are proficient in certain arts, literature and so on. They work very hard and they reach high levels of perfection in their chosen trade, in their chosen area of art. But that extreme effort injures the mind. It creates fatigue. It creates exhaustion. So immediately after a musical concert, you have to go and do something to forget, to run away from your own mind. So people sometimes take to alcoholism and so on. Not necessarily. So that's why in ancient times, there is a statement in some of the ancient books like Niruddha's Bhakti Sutras, we should always keep in our mind a spiritual ideal. Whatever else we do, whatever perfection we are trying to attain in our life, secular life, some spiritual idea should be always there. We may forget it when we go to our office place or university or workplace, but we should not be distracted or disturbed. We should struggle again and again to recollect it, to remember that. Constant practice to recollect and remember a spiritual idea will help us to get established in the spiritual idea. Now, when Lord Krishna explained all these, naturally Arjuna is asking a very, very profound question. In fact, this part of the text is perhaps the most significant part of the entire Bhagavad Gita from the practical spiritual point of view. Because Arjuna is standing in front of us and is asking this question to Lord Krishna on behalf of all of us. Because all people will ask this question. The question is, Ayadi Saddhayo Pedu Yogad Chalidamanasaha Aprapya Yoga Samsiddhim Kam Gatim Krishna Gacchati. This is Arjuna's question. Arjuna Uvacha Ayadi Saddhayo Pedu Yoga Chalidamanasaha Aprapya Yoga Samsiddhim Kam Gatim Krishna Gacchati. Well, suppose a person, a spiritual seeker, is sincere, honest, respectful, devoted, full of saddha, astikya buddhi, all earnestness, sincerity and honesty. But then, and he's struggling sincerely, struggling hard to control his mind, to focus his mind on a spiritual idea. But the mind wanders about. The mind doesn't remain focused on one great idea for too long. Mind wanders. On the one hand, he feels that he is not progressing adequately, he is not progressing enough. That itself shows that he is a sincere spiritual seeker. Every sincere spiritual seeker will be able to detach himself from his disturbing mind and realize the fact that he is disturbed. So if you can feel, well, you are not making enough progress, that actually shows on the one hand that you are actually making progress. Because without making some progress in spiritual life, you won't feel that you are not making enough progress. That dissatisfaction at your own progress, at the rate of your own progress, at the speed of your own spiritual evolution, the dissatisfaction, the realization of your own failure to make progress in spiritual life as fast as you want, itself is an indication that you have made some progress. But it also shows that you have really not made enough progress. It shows that you have made some progress, but it also shows that you have not made enough progress. That's why Saddhayo Petu Yogad Chalidamanasaha. The person is possessed of Saddha. This Saddha is a unique quality. Even a little bit of Saddha, if we can develop, we are bored at the bus. And one day we'll reach our goal, destination. If not in this life, next life. So boarding the train itself is a great thing to accomplish, because the train is bound to reach the destination. So you board the train. If you can have Saddha, Astikya Buddhi, this is the real thing that you want to attain, and you are very earnest and honest and sincere about it, ready to make enough sacrifices for it. That state of mind is called Shraddha in Sanskrit. A person who has this Shraddha, very often, many sincere spiritual seekers who have this Shraddha frequently feel that they have not made enough progress. As I mentioned earlier, I want to remind again that without making some progress, you will not feel that you have not made enough progress. The feeling that you have not made enough progress shows that you have made some progress. But suppose it is not enough. That's why yoga chalidamanasaha. But frequently mind wavers, mind wanders about, mind goes away from its ideal. Mind doesn't remain focused on the ideal for too long. Then what happens to such a person? Yoga Bhrashta means somebody who has deviated from yoga, from spiritual life. Aprapya yoga samsiddhim kam gadim Krishna gacchati. If he fails to attain perfection, then what is going to happen to him? What will be his fate? So we have to remember, who is an ayati? Ayati means somebody who is not being able to control his senses, his mind, etc. Who is not able to practice restrain to the highest degree of perfection. Such a person is called ayati. Means a person whose mind is Vikshipta, wavering. So it means that person is not at a yoga rudha. He has not reached yoga rudha state. He has not attained the highest goal. And perhaps it could also mean somebody who is struggling sincerely. That's why saddhayo pedo yoga charidamanasaha. His mind is distracted away, deviating away from spiritual ideal. But he has got Shraddha, earnestness and sincerity. So that person, maybe he may Arirukshu, is somebody who is desirous of going further and reach the highest spiritual destination. It could also mean a person who is a karma yogi. He is going on doing karma yoga, and he has read in books, he has listened to lectures where he has learned that karma yoga helps you to attain peace of mind, but he is not able to attain perfect, complete contentment, peace of mind. So what happens to him? And Arjuna, he continues this question, and he uses an analogy, a metaphor. Kachinno bhayavibrashtaha chinna brahmavanashyati apradishto mahabaho vimudho brahmanapati. Is it that this person has totally failed? He has fallen from both. I mean, he has not been able to attain anything in this world, and he has not been able to attain anything in spiritual realm. That Ubhaya Vibrashta means somebody who has lost both the world, the spiritual and the secular. Suppose you work hard, do a lot of prayer and meditation, a lot of spiritual sadhanas, But you feel, sometimes you feel everything is coming to dead end, a frustration. Suddenly, this is what happens to everyone. If you have got any doubt, you can read any of the well-known autobiographical writings, either Way of a Pilgrim or St. John of the Cross, or if you read, of course, the most celebrated example can be found in the writings of St. Teresa of Avila. Mind suddenly gets lost. Suddenly everything seems to have come to a dead end. You have worked hard, prayed a lot, prayed for years, fasting, prayers, vows, and so on. But then you feel the journey never comes to an end. There is no light at the end of the tunnel. That feeling comes. Once we understand that this is part of the game of spiritual life, then we'll be able to take it in our stride. In fact, Shankaracharya has something very significant to say in his commentary on the 37th verse. Ayatihi aprayatnavan yogamarge shraddhaya astikya buddhya cha upedo yogat antakale api charidam manasam mano yasya sa charidam manaso brashtasmritihi sa aprapi yoga samsiddhim yoga phalam samyak darshanam kam gadim Krishna gacchadi, etc. This is Shankaracharya's commentary. Very touching commentary. A person is very sincere, very earnest, is practicing, praying, meditating, doing karma yoga. Sometimes your friends and relatives may make fun of you because you work very hard, you pray a lot, you meditate a lot. And they are all watching TV, they are all enjoying, making the best of material life. Every day, every moment is a picnic for them. And you, on the other hand, going to temples, churches, meditating and prayer, and you don't feel inner contentment. Sometimes people will make fun of you. No, the point is, this is a stage which every spiritual seeker has to go through. It's an unavoidable, inevitable stage. It also shows that you are actually sincere. If anybody gets this feeling, well, I have not attained my goal, but I don't feel anything, I don't feel total contentment. So this kind of feeling, feeling lost, that is a state through which every spiritual seeker, either in the tradition of Christian mysticism, where you find many innumerable examples, and also Niruddha's Bhakti Sutras, Shandilya Bhakti Sutras, in the Bhagavad Purana, has got innumerable verses which precisely, correctly analyzes the psyche, the mind of a spiritual seeker as he goes through different stages in his spiritual journey. Once we understand, then you will know, yeah, this is what Bhagavad says, and this is what St. Teresa of Avila too had to face. So here Shankaracharya says, a person who has Saddha and who has not yet been attained the ultimate goal, he may get a distraction at the time of death or before death. So it's called smriti, bhrashta smriti. He may not remember his ideal. At one stage in his life, before he is passing away, he may even forget and may have a deviation. It's called yoga bhrashta. Bhrashta smriti, Bhashikara says. Now, this can be explained through a single example. You find many innumerable spiritual seekers. It could be Saint Augustine or Saint Francis of Assisi. There are many, even the great devotee whom you read about in the Way of Pilgrim, the Russian peasant who happened to accidentally listened to a sermon on the first episode, St. Paul's first episode, about the Jesus prayer, and suddenly he felt trapped, he got attracted towards that, and that day he left his place in search of somebody who could teach him Jesus prayer. Which perhaps the priest who was making the sermon may not have taken seriously, though he made a wonderful sermon, and it benefited the poor Russian peasant in the way of pilgrim, and the Russian peasant eventually became a great mystic, but the priest himself may not have taken seriously. He may be a very ordinary person. It could happen. But anyway, that is the beginning of a new life in the life of, in the case of the pilgrim. And you find the sudden transformation happening in the case of certain mystics. You can find such innumerable examples, hundreds of examples, many great mystics, saints in Indian Hindu tradition. All of a sudden, from nowhere, they started on their spiritual journey. Why this happens is because in the previous life, they have worked very hard. They have led an intense spiritual life. Prayer, meditation, so on. They accumulated huge spiritual bank balance. And then towards the end of their life, it's called Bhrashta Smriti. They lost all memories. As Shankaracharya says, Bhrashta Smriti, Yoga Bhrashta. Suddenly, they had a deviation and they died. Now they are born again. And the influence of what caused this deviation in the previous life continues for some years in their new life, in their next life. But after some time, the old accumulated samskaras and vrittis, impressions and memories suddenly assert themselves, and that leads to the beginning of a new life. That's what explains the mysterious transformations. You can see St. Francis of Assisi, he was a soldier and became a saint. St. Augustine, this was a transformation. St. Paul, another example. I am just giving examples. In Hindu Vedantic tradition, there are hundreds and hundreds of saints and sages. So, that's what happens. That's what exactly Lord Krishna is going to explain in the coming verses. Now, in this context, we should remember, obstacles or partial deviations could be part of spiritual life, not necessarily, but it could also happen in certain persons' cases. Viprasya vai sanyasato devadharadi rupinaha vignan kurvandi ayam hi asman akramya samiyat param. You can find the Bhagavad Purana, which means there will be obstacles in spiritual life, either from one's own previous samskaras, sreyamsi bahuvignani, from samskaras, impressions and feelings and memories, vrittis, from actions in previous life, they suddenly assert themselves mysteriously and push you out of spiritual life, take you out of spiritual life. A devastating distraction, deviation. This could happen. And of course, as I mentioned in the last class, Vyadis, Thyana, Samsaya, Pramada, Alasya, Aviradi, Bhrandi Darsana, Alabdha Bhumigatva, Anavasthitattvani, Chitta Vikshepate Antarayaha, Dukkha Daumanasya, Angame Jayatta, Swasa Praswasa, Vikshepa, Sakabhuva, so Patanjali Yoga Sutra, I explained all this, all kinds of obstacles, vikshepas, distractions, deviations. It could be illness, mental illness, physical illness, laziness, procrastination, feeling of not having attained anything, again not being able to remember, not being able to remain focused on one ideal for too long, sudden change, sudden distractions. All these can happen. So these could perhaps push a man out of spiritual life. But Lord Krishna is going to tell you later, Partha Naiveka Namutra Vinasastasya Vidyade Nahi kalyana krit kaschid durgadim tada gechadi. That is going to happen again. Lord Krishna says, in that, of course, that is not now. We will discuss that subject in the next session, next class. In the 40th verse, Lord Krishna says, Arjuna, even if you have had a sudden deviation, distraction due to obstacles in spiritual life, if you have sudden deviation, getting distracted away from spiritual life, you lose your ideal, don't worry, you are not going to lose anything, because you have made a fixed deposit of your good samskaras, impressions and feelings. And that is yours. That is your spiritual wealth. No one can take it away from you. Our material wealth will disappear. The stock exchange may collapse, the shares may collapse, banks may collapse, one may sue for bankruptcy, industries and business corporations can collapse. But the spiritual wealth that we accumulate in our life, in our present life, that's not going to collapse. That's not going to be lost. And that will be there throughout our life. Even if you don't want, that will be there. Even if you want to lead a very material life, unspiritual life, you will not be able to live a material life, an unspiritual life, an unethical life, if you have done spiritual practices in the past. That's what Lord Krishna is going to explain that now. You will be forced to continue a spiritual journey. You will be forced to start from where you lost in the previous life. That's why you are never late and nothing is lost. That means every day, every moment, every occasion can be an opportunity for starting a new chapter in our spiritual life. That's because from the standpoint of law, karma and reincarnation, these are two important vital points to be kept in mind, to be able to fully appreciate the teachings that we are discussing right now. One is the law of karma and the concept of reincarnation, rebirth. And from the perspective of law of karma and rebirth, time is only in our mind, is only imagination. And birth and death are continuing processes. So every person is born again in a set of circumstances, in a family, in a set of cultural conditions, according to the samskaras, the impressions that he has accumulated in his previous life. Tatradam buddhi samyogam labhade parvodehigam yatadecha tato bhuya samsiddho kurunantana. According to your previous samskaras, vasanas, you will be able to connect with the new idea, with the spiritual ideal in this life. Prapya punyakrutam lokan ushitva shashwati sama suchinam simadam gekhe yoga bhrashto abhijayate. So, we will discuss this, of course, in the next coming days, but it is important to understand right now. In the 41st verse, Lord Krishna makes a very profound statement. Lord Krishna says, if a devotee has done some spiritual disciplines, practiced spiritual disciplines in this life, or done a pure moral life, has helped people, done charitable work, and being a blessing to his relatives, to society. But then, to the end, he had a deviation, a distraction. He fell away from spiritual life. What happened to such a person? He will be able to continue his spiritual life when he is born again. He will be born in a family where his parents will be righteous, will be spiritually oriented. He must have had a fall in his previous life because he had some desires that he wanted to fulfill. And will be born in a family where he will be able to fulfill his unfulfilled desires from previous life. So a person who wanted to make a lot of wealth, a very, very sincere spiritual seeker, very honest, very honest and sincere, but he was little greedy. This could happen. And because of his greed, of his ego, of his wealth, he had a fall from his spiritual ideal. But he had otherwise, in all other aspects, he has led a very meaningful life. He practiced some karma yoga, he has done devotion, everything. Now what will happen to him? He will be born in a family where his parents will create a situation where he will be able to enjoy his unfulfilled desire, making plenty of money. He will be born in a rich family. But he will get an opportunity to realize the emptiness of greed, the emptiness of wealth. He will be given a chance, he will get a chance to go beyond the previous life, beyond the state he has reached in previous life. He will realize one day, money is nothing. So the greed is now gone. The greed was the reason why he had a fall in his previous life. In the next life, that greed also is taken away from him. So what happens? Yoga, so Suchinam Simadam Gehe, that person will reincarnate in the home of a person or a family who are pure and prosperous. At the same time, creating the right conditions in their home for that new person, for this person to continue his spiritual life. That's why in the Hindu tradition there is a belief that a dead soul, a dead person, when he is seeking a new home, new parentage for reincarnation, he will be seeking the right kind of people. And families also, parents, would-be parents, husband and wife, would pray for a good ideal person to be born in their family. And that's why, because such a person will be a blessing to the family. So the soul that is seeking to be born again will be looking for an ideal home, ideal parentage, ideal set of parents to be born, so that he can continue his spiritual journey. So the discussion will take place over the next few days on this subject. We will continue this discussion again the next session. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Rama Krishna Arpanamastu.